Who killed Laura Palmer? This was the catchphrase of the first 90s that urged the director David Lynch and the screenwriter Mark Frost to make the public discover the killer of Laura Palmer in the cult TV series Twin Peaks. But few of people know that Laura Palmer really existed. This was the shocking finding of the body of Laura Palmer, played by the wonderful Shelley Lee in the cult TV series Twin Peaks. But few people know that Laura Palmer really existed. Her name was Hazel Irene Drew. Hazel Irene Drew, who was murdered on July the 7th in 1908, and instead of Laura Palmer, her killer has remained unknown. This was the real Laura Palmer. And now I explain you the reason why. Hazel Irene Drew was absolutely the inspiration of the screenwriter of Twin Peaks, Mark Frost. Thanks to his grandmother, because he spent every summer at Taborton. Not in Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks is a fictional place. The real place where Laura Palmer, or instead, it's better to say, Hazel Drew was murdered, was Teal Sand Lake in Taborton, near New York. And Mark Frost spent his summers at the house of his grandmother. And his grandmother lived there. And he got to know about the murder of this gorgeous blonde girl at Teal Sand Lake, and about the fact that her ghost never left the shores of the lake, because the ghost of Hazel Drew right now is still on their shores and visible especially at night. After 116 years, her death is still possible to... after 116 from her death, it's still possible to know who killed her. So, follow me. I make you see other photos, and then I make you know her story, and then I will pass to make you see incredible videos, photos, and official documents of Hazel Irene Drew. The fictional Laura Palmer really existed. This is another photo of this gorgeous girl. She was very beautiful, and she had many similarities with the character of Laura Palmer. In fact, Mark Frost suggested the director David Lynch to take Hazel Drew as the character to write the story of Laura Palmer. And these were articles of that. Think about that this article was released in the magazine New York World. Watch the date. I want to make you see better the date. The date was, okay, here we are. It was the 15th of July 1908. And already there were many magazines talking about this mystery. And I will also make you know all the theories, all the story about her. But she was really existed. This is another photo of Hazel Drew when she was about 14. Then she became like a princess. She was a super beauty. So, after 116 years from her murder, we are still on time for discovering the identity of her killer remained unknown. Instead, in the TV series Twin Peaks, the murderer of Laura Palmer was discovered. Here we are in my studio, and then we will return to my personal computer to make you watch really shocking videos, photos, documents, really strong. Now, Hazel Irene Drew was born on June the 3rd, 1888 in Postenkiel, in the county of Rensselaer. This count is not far from New York. She was born in a modest family and also a large family. She had many sisters and also brothers. Hazel Irene Drew was very beautiful, blonde, blue eyes, blue big eyes, and her beauty didn't go unnoticed. And all the people who know her, they stated that she was lively and she was a good-hearted girl because she started to work very young, when she was only 14, as housekeeper for several wealthy and also powerful families. And she always went to the church on Sunday. She was generous. So when you hear these witnesses, these statements of that age, Hazel was painted as a lively, apparently the classic soap and water girl. She was a small town girl, but like Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks, the cult series, she had a kind of double life for sure, because her style of life didn't coincide with her low salary. I make you examples. She was always dressed with very expensive and luxurious dresses, jewels. She traveled very often, and where did she get all those money to travel so often? She was used to do shopping, and we got to know that her salary was low. How was it possible? So, among the nights of the 10th of July and the 11th of July 1908, Hazel Drew body was found dead. And I want to tell you that Teal Ponce Sand Lake is near to few miles from New York, and it's a small city where she had barely 10,000 of inhabitants, but it was, and it's still, a touristic area, rich of lakes, where people can go on vacation to relax and above all to fish. And the most famous lake is Teal's Pond. Near Teal's Pond there is a wood suitable for camping. And three friends, Lorenzo Gruber, George White, in the night among the 10th and the 11th of July 1908, while they were preparing to come back home, Lorenzo noticed a strange bassoons floating in the lake of Teal's Pond. A third friend, Gilbert Miller, said to have noticed that kind of bassoon also the previous day, but he didn't give it much attention. However, somebody near them noticed a pair of women white gloves and a very elegant hat with two big black feathers. It was an expensive hat. And so, with the help of other men of that zone of Teal's Pond, they were able to take that bosom until the shores. And with horror, they discovered that bosom was the corpse of a very young woman with a face down the water. And this corpse was unrecognizable because the face was swollen because of the water, and it was also already in the state of decomposition. And they say that the face was almost black, also also not only because of the decomposition state, but also because those waters were very muddy. So the following day, some things made think about Hazel Drew. So the following day, her family, the Drew, were called to recognize the corpse of their daughter. And of course, there was nothing anymore of that stunning beauty of Hazel Irene Drew. And when she was found dead, she was still dressed with a luxurious dress that was made to measure by her seamstress. So the family lived in the province and they were called to recognize Hazel. The parents were strangely so cold and indifferent and weren't even sure to recognize Hazel in that corpse found in the lake. Instead, the sister-in-law of Hazel, Eva, and Mrs. Schumacher, who was the seamstress for the family and of course for Hazel, immediately recognized Hazel thanks to the jewels that she wore only in rare occasions. Above all, 2 pins. And Hazel really laughed and took care of those pins. So it was incredible to see her dead body with those so much expensive and golden pins. And Mrs. Schumacher was absolutely sure that she was Hazel when he noticed that a pin had her initials, H.I.D., Hazel Irene Drew. And also then because she was recognized because of her gold dental fillings. So it was a shock for the community, and then immediately the investigation started. Because, not only because she was very young, she was only 20 years old, but also because her beauty never went unnoticed, and so everybody wanted to discover who murdered Hazel Drew. And I think it's very incredible because the coroner, when first watched the body of Hazel, stated she committed suicide. What the hell? Suicide? Nobody believed in this version, of course, because it was the most absurd hypothesis of the case, because she was dressed like almost she was going to a wedding or a luxurious ceremony. And she was very happy and enthusiastic before leaving. And above all, then the autopsy revealed that her skull was smashing in the back of her head by a blunt object. Of course, it was a murder. And I want to tell you that, as I told you before, in the case of Twin Peaks series, Laura Palmer's killer was found. Instead, in the case of Hazel Drew, the identity of her killer has remained unknown. But it's not too late, because if you go to Teaspoon's Sandy Lake, there is still the ghost of Hazel Drew, above all at night. And I read at some point that even the brother of Mark Frost saw a ghost. So it means that Hazel doesn't rest in peace at all, and her ghost can finally leave the lake only when the truth will be revealed. So there are two writers that I can define also maybe the hugest fans of the TV series Twin Peaks, who wrote a book released in 2022, and it's called, these two authors are David Bushman and Mark Givens. The book is titled Murder at Teal's Pond, and in this book they reveal you, according to them, who really killed Hazel Drew and the motive. I want to be sincere. I read that book and sorry, but I believe in their honesty, in their extreme job to get so many informations about Hazel Drew after more than 1 century. But the explanation doesn't convince me at all. Also because there aren't concrete proofs. And there were people who had stronger motives to kill. And then I will show you them also with videos. There were more people more interested in killing Hazel Drew for different motives. So, if I read this book, I want to ask them, which are the concrete proofs? Okay, your solution is just a theory. It's just a possible twist in her case. But I sincerely don't think according to me, these aren't the killers of Hazel Irene Drew. And also because the ghost of Irene is still in that lake, so maybe if in 2022 the truth was completely revealed, maybe it was the time to fly to heaven. Don't you think so too? But everybody make an opinion of your own, because from the murder of Hazel, 116 years passed by, so it's very difficult, but not impossible. And I tell you the reason why. Because for people who don't know me, I am a psychic, and I don't get money for that, not even a cent. I don't get money. And I always see ghosts in the haunted places. And even if when I'm, for example, with a crew and I go to visit a haunted graveyard or a haunted castle, or in this case it will be a haunted lake, I always see the ghost or the ghosts who are there, and they don't rest in peace, of course. But many of my team don't see any ghosts. So I see ghosts in the haunted places. But I'm also able to see ghosts even in places not called haunted. And this is the reason why I'm telling you that I'm sure that if I had the possibility to visit Teal's Pond Sand Lake, I could enter in contact with Hazel Irene Drew and discover who really killed her, or to fall in a kind of trance in which I see the murder. I'm not kidding. It also happened to me before. And I go on. So the case couldn't be closed as suicide. So there was a detective with his team, and they started investigating the life of Hazel. And everybody say that Hazel was very beautiful, very careful, with such a good heart. She always went to church. She was the perfect girl of a small town. But there are things that contrast with these statements about all the people who knew her. Above all, because even her best friend, Carrie Weather, stated, "My friend, she praised her with many compliments, with endless compliments." But everybody wanted to stress that she didn't hang out with any man. She wasn't dating anybody, and she didn't even have admirers. It's false for sure, don't worry. And as I told you before, she started to work when she was only 14, and she was the housekeeper of wealthy and also powerful families. I'm talking about also in the houses of several politicians. And even if her salary was low, they always, the witnesses always saw her dressed with too much expensive dresses, jewels, luxurious hats that small town girls couldn't afford with that salary. And also she used to doing shopping very often in luxurious boutiques, and she had dinner in expensive, elegant restaurants, and she traveled very often among New York, Boston, Providence. Where did she get all those money also to pay the tickets and to spend some time in these cities if her salary was $450? Of course, she was gaining money in another way. And a journalist of the New York Words was following the track of the murder of Hazel, discovered that Hazel wrote in a diary, like Laura Palmer, not the same confessions, of course, but in her secret diary there was written that she had taken French pills. It meant, at that time, French pills meant pills to abort. So it's for sure that Hazel got pregnant, but the pregnancy wasn't important very much to understand the identity of her killer, because she aborted. So there wasn't a baby anymore. So I want to remind you the amazing 90s. I was already born and I was one of the fans of the cult TV series Twin Peaks that in Italy was released on January the 9th, 1991. And who killed Laura Palmer was the catchphrase of that period. Laura Palmer as Hazel was the perfect girlfriend of America. She was engaged with the football player of the team. She was faithful, she went to church, she did all good things, and instead she had a double life because then we discovered that she had been raped by a strange Bob that only in the end of the series and of the movie Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me of 1992 that you can discover the identity of Bob. So the rapes that she's forced to have in her adolescence when everybody thought that she was a virgin led Laura Palmer, okay, I'm talking about Laura Palmer, took Laura Palmer to sex, drugs, orgies, and she was cocaine addicted, and she was an alcoholist, and then also a prostitute, part-time in one-eyed jacks to anesthetize the pain of the rapes by Bob, confessed in her secret diaries. Of course, this was just an inspiration, and I want to stress again that Twin Peaks, the location of Twin Peaks, doesn't exist at all. It's fictional, because in Twin Peaks they tell you that they are at the border between the state of Washington and Canada. Instead, it wasn't, the Twin Peaks was shot in Snoqualmie, above all in North Bend in the state of Washington, and in the San Fernando Valley in California. So Twin Peaks doesn't exist at all. So when now let's back to Hazel Irene Drew. When the autopsy was done, they discovered that she didn't drown in the lake because there wasn't water in her lungs, and here she was murdered, hit with an unidentified weapon. It could be a stone, or it's called a blunt object that hit the back of her skull and smashed it. And Mark Frost was in all the summers, he went to spend the holidays at his grandmother's house that was in Taborton, very near to Teal's Pond, Sand Lake. And immediately he got to know this story, that it wasn't a legend at all. He got immediately to know that a very, very magnificent blonde girl who was just 20 was horribly murdered in the lake near. And also his grandmother Betty told him scary stories, but also because all the grandmothers or the mothers of the place were worried about that ghost in the lake because they didn't know about the intentions. So to all the guys who were even adolescents, people told, don't go at night in the wood. Don't bathe in Sand Lake alone. Don't go out at night with friends. And so, when Mark Frost, the screenwriter of Twin Peaks, got to know the entire story of Hazel, when he grew up a bit more, he decided to tell everything to the director David Lynch, who accepted to do the character of Laura Palmer based on Hazel Drew. I was just telling you that this catchphrase, "Who killed Laura Palmer?" urged the director and the screenwriter to make the public discover as soon as possible the identity of the killer of Laura Palmer. Of course, the final, I can tell you, it's a discovery that it's demonic, incestuous and rough. But I want to tell you that I suggest you, for the few people who haven't watched this movie, Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, of 1992, was always directed by David Lynch, and the actress who played the role of Laura Palmer was always Shirley, as Ray Wise, playing the role of Leland Palmer, the father of Laura Palmer, Kyle MacLachlan in the role of Detective Cooper. There is always that magnificent song about that genius musician Angelo Badalamenti, who had Italian origins. And there were also these important actresses, actors, and also singers, musicians, like David Bowie, Chris Isaac, Heather Graham. The same David Lynch played the role of Gordon Cole, and I don't know if you recognized him, Keith Sutherland playing Frank Silva, the demon. Okay, now I return to the point. In the beginning of 1908, Hazel got sick and spent some time at his uncle's home, because also his uncle was her wife was dead. Excuse me. But this illness maybe can be connected to the French pills. I think that in this period she wanted to hide her pregnancy, and then she took the French pills, she aborted, and then she, at the end of the convalescence, Hazel wrote to her friend William Hogarth that she wanted to take a vacation. But then she found a job at the Carey family. The Carey family was a welfare family, a wealthy family. Edward Corey was a teacher of engineering, and he had a lovely wife, and he had also children, and there Hazel was housekeeper and also babysitter for their children, and they offered her food, accommodation, and a salary. Not too much, but a salary. And however, in only 5 months that she had been working for the Carey family, she already had taken 4 vacations of a few days, but already 4 vacations in 5 months of job. And the last one was in May 1908 with her best friend Carrie Weather in New York by a little boat where they spent 2 nights in New York. And immediately when she came back from the trip with her aunt Minnie Taylor, immediately when she came back from New York, she immediately asked the Carey family to have immediately another holiday for the weekend of the 4th of July, and they accepted. Oh my gosh! Because then I will talk about the suspects in the murder of Hazel, I can tell you that her best friend, Carrie Weather, when Hazel was murdered on the lake, was on another part of the States with her family or friends. So Carrie, to rule out the best friend, Carrie Weather, for the murder of Hazel. And also Carrie stressed to the investigators, to the detective, no, Hazel was an angel. She didn't date any man. She didn't even have admirers. And it sounded so strange for a so marvelous girl like Hazel. So they, in the end, the aunt Minnie states to the police that Hazel was dating a man who was working in a dental clinic, and that this man wanted to marry her. And this statement was confirmed by Mrs. Carey because she stated that once Hazel asked her to go out in a late time, at night time, because she had to go to the dental clinic. So of course Mrs. Carey impeded it. So the police went to the dentist of Hazel, Dr. Nauf, and he claimed that once Hazel asked him if he was working until late time, and he answered no, and immediately Hazel ran away and she didn't appear anymore. So they think about a dental clinic and maybe 2 or 3 dentists and people who work in a dental clinic. But in this case, this is, in my personal view, the track that could take straight to the killer, or not to the killer, but to the sweetheart of Hazel. Because you have to know that Dr. Nauf had a son who was 22, and he was very handsome, and he worked very in a very late time, also in the night at the dental clinic. So I tell you the truth, Hazel could have had many lovers, and then I tell you about the great probability that she was a prostitute. But it doesn't mean anything, because the fact that she wanted to go there, there was the son of Dr. Nauf, and his name was William, and William at the same age of Hazel, and he was a nice guy. Why don't follow in also this track? Because I don't think if one of the two were involved in the murder of Hazel, I don't think about William. Instead, I think about the father. Maybe because he wanted his son to marry a girl with more noble, a city girl, instead of a girl who lived in a province. This is just a thought of mine. But because the police didn't investigate this track and the killer of Hazel has remained unknown, maybe I'm not so wrong. Of course they were wrong, because they never found the murderer of Hazel Drew. So, moreover, Hazel was enthusiastic because she planned a vacation to Lake George for the weekend of the 4th of July. However, when she arrived at the station, her aunt Minnie stated that suddenly Hazel was strange, and she was stating that she didn't feel very well, and she didn't want to travel in so crowded trains. I think it was an excuse, of course. So she gave up on that vacation, and she went with her aunt Minnie Taylor to visit two cousins with whom they spent the whole weekend, and then they will tell to the police that Hazel was really serene with a high mood and very happy. They didn't notice something wrong. But of course the detective of the investigation and his team, the first question was, why did Hazel give up suddenly on that trip, so much desired, so much planned, and so waited? Why? It was a normal question to wonder for the detective and for all the team. And why, when she came back from the trip with her Aunt Minnie, she quit the job at Carrie's house? Why? When she left the Carrie house, she went to visit Aunt Minnie, stating that she was leaving to go to visit her female friends in a resort where she had worked the previous summer. But when the police went to the three friends and interrogated them, the three girls stated that they never saw her, never heard there, and they didn't receive a sign or an advice that she was going to visit them. And now, her last sightings. It's incredible. Also, in 1908, there are screenshots, photos, everything. Quite nowadays. I'm really shocked. So, for sure, Hazel was seen at 1:15 p.m. at the Union Station of Troy, where she did picks up and deliver the trunk from the carry. And then she met a friend called Mrs. Robinson, who was asking her, "Where are you going?" And Hazel answered, "Along the river." "Along the river? Until where?" "Until New York. If I succeed in meeting misfortune." Hazel wasn't able to end up her sentence because she heard the announce of a train close to live. And so she rushed to the ticket office. And so it's impossible to know who she was going to meet. But this wasn't the last sighting of Hazel. Hazel was seen the following day. So the question is, where she had been, and above all, where she slept among the 6th and the 7th of July nights. But the following morning of the 7th of July, she comes back to the Union Station, where she does the registration of the luggage deposit at 1:49 p.m. According to the detective O'Brien and his team, is basic to discover with who Hazel had an appointment. Autopsy revealed that not only Hazel had been hit with a blunt object in the back of her skull, but she had been also strangled with a pink ribbon torn away from her corset. And here the doctors were quarreling because they stated that it was impossible. She was in full decomposition, so there wasn't clear signs of strangle. But the thing for sure they all agree is that she was murdered 8,000%, and she wasn't pregnant. So the district attorney O'Brien and his team, they started to study the letters, the postcards, the diaries into the trunk of Hazel, and they found letters, photos, nothing important at first sight. And at her funeral, there wasn't almost anybody. Think about that. Okay, it was raining very strong, but it was a tragedy for that small town. A so young, beautiful girl murdered in a so horrible way. And at her funeral, there were men that then 12 people. Oh my God! Why? So, the hour place where Hazel was seen for the very last time. It was at 7 p.m. on July the 7th in Taborton Road. It was a mountain street and it was very isolated, and it was near to the woods where there is Teal Pond Sand Lake. Why? And she was dressed in a weird way to go for a walk in the mountain or for camping, for example, because she had a luxurious dress and she had gold jewels, 2 pins, and her dress was visibly so elegant, luxurious and expensive. She was wearing white gloves, she was wearing boots with high heels, a hat with 2 huge black feathers. So, these were the witnesses. She was seen by the couple Ryan Miller, who was coming back home from the city. Then the couple Rollman, that instead they were going from the mountain to the city, and they immediately noticed Hazel for the way she was dressed, with that dress, with that particular expensive hat, but also because she was a very young woman in an isolated zone near to the sundown. And the wife noticed that she was picking some raspberries, but I can tell you that in the autopsy there weren't raspberries at all in her stomach. Then she was seen by the young farm hand Frank Smith, that they say he was slow. And it was well known that he had a great crush on Hazel. In fact, he greeted her and she replied bye, and at the same time there was also the ploddler of coal, Rudolph Gandrum. He was 35. He greeted her too because they know her, but at is maybe the greater witness who could not to go in prison, Frank Smith, because he always remained the first suspect, because he hadn't a so huge alibi. He was completely crazy about Hazel, but Rudolph Gondrom stated that they both went away in a bar. It was late evening. It was an isolated area, dressed so. There is also another hypothesis. Not far from there, her little brother Willie, who was only 7 years, worked in a farm, and he swore that his beloved sister Hazel wasn't able to live without greeting him before, without saying him at least the last goodbye. And however, somebody had to accompany Hazel, because she was dressed and she was also wearing boots with high heels, so she couldn't pass through the forest to go and find her little brother. And then then it looked like she was waiting for somebody, because she was stand still in Taborton Road. Some people suspected that the killer was with her because the wife Roman stated that it looked like a figure behind her, but I'm not sure, because then she was always stand still, like she was waiting for the people she trusted in. And of course the killer convinced her to go into the hood, and it had to be a person she truly trusted in him. Otherwise she couldn't enter a wood at quiet night. So of course she accepted, because she trusted in this person. And then when she was on her back, the killer hit her in the back of her head, and then when she died, he dragged her and threw her into the muddy lake. Some detectives did another hypothesis, that she could have been a victim of a maniac, of a sex assaulter, but she was so in deep decomposition that it was impossible to say if she had been raped or not. And the detective O'Brien stated that it was very improbable, and I agree with him. So the investigation arrived at a dead point. These were all the tracks that weren't enough to catch the killer, to know and catch the killer of Hazel. The suspect, the Uncle William, the uncle I told you before, but he suffered very much from depression. He was really apathetic, and it explains the reason why when he saw the corpse of his nephew, he was so cold and indifferent. Then Frank Smith, the first suspect until the end of the investigations. The farm and said slow, and they say he was the last one to have seen her. I don't agree with this hypothesis, because if he was the killer, he wasn't forced to reveal to have seen her if it was true. He was the one who saw her for the last time, and he was also with the other worker. Then the three young men who found the body: Lorenzo Gruber, George White, Gilbert Miller. Then the Romans, the couple Romans, the couple Ryan Miller, the sister-in-law of Eva, people in the police or the coroners, because remember that in the beginning they wanted to close the case as suicide. Then the Carey family, and even the parents of Hazel, and above all also Henry Comrack, because he was a rich businessman, and there were bad rumors about the fact that the resort where Hazel worked the summer before was in reality a place where girls were forced to prostitute, and that it was a warehouses where there were very perverted things like orgies and so on, but there wasn't the proof. Then even the dentist of Hazel, because not the dentist of Hazel, a dentist who was working in the dental clinical, who proposed to her. I don't see this, because he was already married, and I don't know if at that time there was the divorce. So, so this was the final writings from the coroner. From the witnesses I received, I concluded that Hazel Irene Drew is dead because of an extravasation of blood into the dura mater caused by a hit at the back of his head with a blunt object in a known manner. So it was the end of the investigations. And now let's go to my personal computer immediately. This was Teal's Pond Sand Lake in 1908. Just the lake in which the dead body of Hazel Drew was found. Incredible.
A young woman was discovered floating in Teal's Pond on July 11, 1908. Decomposition had already begun to set in with a vengeance. Dressed in her finest clothes, her blonde hair was a tangle of knots and pond debris, partially hiding a neck. Her skull had been crushed by a heavy blow to the back of her head. Nearby on the shore, her delicate white gloves were neatly folded and resting beside her fancy straw hat, which was accessorized with a pin monogrammed with the letter H. Rendered unrecognizable by advanced decay, the woman had to be identified by her clothes and dental fillings. She was 20-year-old Hazel Drew, a governess with a stellar reputation in the community. At the time, her death shocked the small mill town of Sand Lake, New York, and over 100 years later, her case would be the inspiration for the story of Laura Palmer. A list of suspects, but the investigation was severely limited by the forensic advancements available at the time. While they couldn't pin down the murder's identity, they did learn a lot about Hazel. Although each new piece of the puzzle only seemed to bring more questions. Before her death at age 20, Hazel was thought of as a wholesome girl. She'd been working for a number of powerful, well-connected families in Troy, New York since she was 14. Her close proximity to them gave her a taste of the kind of privileged lifestyle she wouldn't be able to experience otherwise. Now, despite her modest salary as a maid, she dressed in expensive clothes and took frequent trips to Boston, New York City, and Providence, Rhode Island. How did she afford all of this on such a tight budget? According to a close friend, she was just really good with money. Here are her exact words according to information published on hazeldrew.com. Quote, "I never saw her in the company of a man all the time I was in Troy, and she told me on more than one occasion that she had no sweetheart. Hazel could make $1 go farther than any woman I've ever seen." But is that the whole story? The evidence investigators pieced together told a very different tale. About a month before she was killed, Hazel told friends she was planning to spend the 4th of July weekend at Lake George, a resort spot tucked in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. On July 3rd, the night before she was supposed to leave, she stopped by her seamstress and begged her to make a new shirtwaist from the fabric she was holding in her hands. She was still wearing it when her corpse was pulled from the pond 8 days later. For some reason, Hazel never left as planned the next morning. She spent the holiday with her aunt, Minnie Taylor, instead. A few days later, on July 6th, she quit her job.
Look at incredible.
Spent the holiday with her aunt, Minnie Taylor.
Incredible. Watch how many magazines, even at that time in 1908, they were talking about Hazel Irene Drew. It's incredible.
Taylor instead. A few days later, on July 6th, she quit her job without warning. packed her things, and left the residence of her employer, Professor Carey. Nobody really knows why she decided to leave. According to everyone she knew, she seemed happy as the governess of the Carey children and never expressed a desire to find another job. We don't have a full picture of what was going on during Hazel Drew's last hours of life, but we have some pretty clear snapshots. She was seen at the train station several times, either waiting for someone or traveling around.
Look! It's incredible! Think about nowadays when there are true crimes, you see all the documentaries with all the videos, pictures of the missing people, of the dead people. And look, even in 1908, this was Hazel at the train station. It's really something incredible.
According to her friends and family, she gave conflicting reasons for her plans. She told her aunt, for instance, that she was planning to meet up with some friends, but even though Hazel did run into a friend at the train station on July 6th, it definitely wasn't planned. She told that friend she was going, but didn't explain any further. She checked a suitcase into the storage locker at the station and took a train headed for Albany. The reasoning behind this remains a mystery, but a series of letters uncovered after her murder, written by a man with the initials CES, seemed to shed a little light on her movements in those final hours. Now here's a line from one of the letters from the mystery man.
Con il virtual try-on di
So this is another track. Then I tell you my what I think. Really, I think that the key, the investigations had to deepen this, and now I immediately make you read what I mean. Okay.
Your merry smile and twinkling eyes torture me. Your face haunts me. Why can't I be content again? You have stolen my liberty. Please don't forget a promise to write. When I reach Albany again, I will meet you at the tavern. I must see you soon, or I'll die of starvation. Was she planning to meet up with him before her death? It certainly seems plausible. She had 6 letters from CES in her possession. Each was written from a city Hazel had recently visited. It stands to reason she was regularly making trips to rendezvous with this man in the course of his own travels. Whether or not they actually made contact on the day she was found is unclear. When the police searched the suitcase she'd left behind, they found it packed with all the essentials for a getaway. Clothes, nightgowns, her toothbrush and comb. But there was an extra little tidbit hidden at the bottom, a clipping from the local newspaper that read, "Edward Lavoie has departed for Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he will remain all winter." Unfortunately, though, the police could not make any connections between Edward and Hazel. The identity of the person she may or may not have met remains a mystery.
This is another track to investigate, because as I told you before, there was, as I told you before, in my opinion, there were three tracks of investigation to deepen, and not the best friend or the couple who saw her for the last time, or the family Carey. And really I don't understand, because maybe they could discover much more. And so I go on.
Back from Albany, but she was seen back in Sand Lake the next evening. July 7th, 1908 was an unbearably hot day, but she was dressed to the nines in her layered skirts, elegant boots, and fine white gloves. She didn't seem to mind the heat all that much, according to one couple that spotted her picking raspberries along the side of Taborton Road, very near to Teal's Pond. They noticed her beauty right away. And out here in this secluded place, it gave them cause for concern. Dusk would be falling soon, and there were few places quite as dangerous for a pretty girl than a patch of dark, isolated woods on either side of a deserted road. Those fancy Victorian heels weren't exactly made for running, after all. But like most any other couple in a similar situation, they followed the age-old social contract of minding their own business. They continued on their way and left her to her raspberry bushes without a single care in the universe. After about 15 minutes or so, another pair of travelers came across Hazel at a curve in the road that some locals referred to as Piss Hollow. One of these travelers, a 17-year-old farmhand named Frank Smith, recognized her immediately, and they exchanged greetings. He had a pretty heavy crush on her, as it turns out, and some people suggested that his crush was more akin to an unhealthy obsession. Naturally, this made the authorities look at him a little closer. Generally described as slow by those who knew him, Frank gave a handful of conflicting stories and alibis. And for years, he was pretty high on the list of possible suspects. But given the lack of concrete evidence available, that doesn't really mean much. The police were under an incredible amount of pressure to solve the case, both from reporters and the locals, and their list of suspects ran nearly a dozen names long at times. When they hit a wall with one suspect, they simply moved on to the next one. Without the benefits of that modern DNA analysis has to offer, there wasn't much more they could do without it.
If there was DNA, I'm sure that they could find more. But now there is another witness who stated to have heard screams just the night in which Hazel was murdered. And it was also in the magazine of that age. Screams in camp, Teal spawned mystery clue. Girl's story of a night alarm starts police on trail for Hazel Drew's lair. So a woman stated that she heard these screams.
But until a couple of days later, anyway. Another likely suspect, it seemed, was Hazel's own uncle, the recently widowed William Taylor. He lived less than a mile from Teal's pond and helped pull her bloated corpse from the water once she was found. Described as suicidal and melancholy, a good number of people who have studied the case believe that William was the true killer, thanks in no small part to the behavior of his sister, Minnie. When questioned about the death of her niece, a family member she was very close to, Minnie, refused to cooperate and even advised Hazel's friends to do the same. Her fictional counterpart, the young Laura Palmer, Hazel seemed to relish the attention of powerful men, and much like Laura, she very well may have lost her life as a result. Even after all these years, people are still drawn to the drop-dead gorgeous girl from a long-forgotten time, eager to study a mystery that the police had no hope of solving back then. But today, two amateur sleuths think they cracked it. David Bushman and Mark Givens wrote
and
a book
then
called
I talk about that book I was just telling you before.
William Cushing and Fred Schatzel. Here's some of the evidence they laid out in the book as reported in the New York Post. Fred Schatzel was an embalmer at a funeral home in Troy. On July 6th, they say he reserved a horse and carriage for a friend of his, William Cushing. And where was the carriage meant to be going that night? Sand Lake, the area where Hazel was found, 20 minutes outside of Troy. And as it turned out, the men had quite a lot in common. They were both well-known movers and shakers in the local Republican Party, but more importantly, they both knew Hazel. On the night of July 7th, a Sand Lake couple noticed a fancy city carriage in the area around Teal's pond, but William and Fred were quickly cleared. However, the authors now say that they were only cleared because the Republican Party controlled what went on in the town, and the investigation was really a cover-up. But if they really did it, and why, has yet to...
As I told you before, I read that book and I appreciate the efforts of these two great authors, but I don't think that those politicians were involved in the murder of Hazel, because I think, I want to make you see this, and then I tell you that more and more then we go on, I'm more sure about my way of thinking.
Apparently, the co-creator, Mark Frost, grew up spending his summers in Taborton, New York, near the pond where she was found. And his grandmother used to tell him scary stories about the ghost of Hazel Drew haunting the forests forever. The legend stuck with him until the day he and David Lynch were brainstorming a new series concept.
You may be familiar with the story of Laura Palmer, the homecoming queen whose murder kickstarted the iconic series Twin Peaks, but do you know about Hazel Drew? Like Laura, she was a young, dignified woman who met with foul play under mysterious circumstances, her body washing ashore a lake in upstate New York. Both Laura Palmer and Hazel Drew were murdered, but Hazel's actually happened. Her grisly unsolved demise from over a century ago has since served as a cautionary tale for going into the woods.
And now I go on. Have you watched these incredible footages? But that time, I think it was impossible to find so many documents of that time. I immediately make you see.
A writer who would use the story of Hazel Drew as major inspiration for the twisting tale of Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks. Just as reality can inspire fiction, stories we're told through TV shows and movies can impact what happens in our world. In the time since Twin Peaks, Hazel's murder has become the subject of re-examination, with experts trying to piece together a mystery from over 100 years ago. We can't begin on 11th, 1908, floating face down in Teal's Pond, Sand Lake, New York, right outside of Troy. Cause of death, a blow to the back of the head, her skull crushed with a blunt, unknown weapon. Hazel came from a working-class family and led a seemingly ordinary life. She worked as a domestic servant, making a modest living doing basic housekeeping chores in a seemingly ordinary small town. She went to work, went to church, and spent time with her friends. By all accounts, she was considered stunningly beautiful, vibrant, and outgoing. Her beauty was marked, and even among the host of Pretty Girls of Troy, Hazel Drew was distinctive. All seemed normal in the 20-year-old woman's life, but Hazel's quiet, normal little life was not at all what it seemed.
By far the most...
And now, as I told you, she looked like the perfect girl from a small town, and instead she had a double life. I go.
Quickly found discrepancies in her ordinary life. She took frequent trips to Boston, New York City, Rhode Island, and often bought tailored clothing, an extravagant purchase for a mere domestic servant. Hidden within her trunk were dozens of postcards and letters, a prominent amount of which were from a secret admirer only known as C.E.S. Yet to her...
So, I want to make you see these letters and postcards of that time. So, watch. These are evidence, and these were the letters sent by these mysterious, and also signed as CES. In all, there are 8 letters from this mysterious man. So, look, this is thanks to the police that even at that time decided to publish this exclusive material. It's possible nowadays that we are in 2024 to have so precious documents. Look, evidence 1, the signature, CES, and it's normal, maybe it was the detective O'Brien who is CES. And this is the basic question: who was CES? And now I tell you, before going on, which would have been my investigations, the tracks I would have deepened if I was the detective of that time. The first one was the dentist of Hazel, Dr. Nauf, because remember that she wanted to go late in the evening or even at night at the dental clinic. But even if there were rumors, I'm pretty sure that she hadn't a relationship with her dentist, but with the handsome son of the dentist, William, who was 20 years old too. So, if the two ones were involved in her murder, maybe or the father didn't agree with an engagement between his son, who was in the wealthy class, and his small town girl, and there were also these rumors. Then my second track was, of course, CES. CES is that lover. He was completely, deeply in love with Hazel, but it wasn't a normal love. I made you read the letter he sent. Don't make me wait, or I will die of starvation. It was love, but it was also an obsession, and love and obsession can be very close to death if there has been a quarrel or a violent speech between them. So I would have deepened absolutely, because it was in the last times, this CES, as it was in the last times that Hazel had this has become maniac, a bit of that dental clinic in which, of course, there was Dr. Nauf, but late at night in that clinic remained the son of the dentist, William. And then when they said that in the bottom of her dress they found a piece of paper in which there was written, because she ripped out of a newspaper and put in her pocket this piece of paper in which there was written the name Edward, and also the name was, excuse me, Edward Lavoy. Why did Hazel have this piece of paper in her pocket, Edward Lavoie, I would have deepened also this track. And now I can go on.
Only known as CES. Yet to her friends and family, she had no romantic relationships. And that wasn't the only thing that didn't add up. In the days leading up to her...
And so now I return on this. Okay. I want to also remind you the book Murder at Teal's Pond, even if there are not concrete proofs, and I don't think they understood who the real killer was. Also because now okay.
Across this quote from Mark Frost, someone asked him, about the start.
Mark Givens, one of the authors.
The start of the story was, Laura Palmer. Her body is found washed ashore. What he actually said was he had known a story from his childhood about this ghost that haunted the lakes up in this upstate New York, Sand Lake, New York, that his grandmother would tell him about.
It's not like everybody in Taborton knew that story. Most people, in fact...
I respect these authors very much, but I want to tell you that according to me, the motive of the murder of Hazel Drew was a passionate motive, not a politician or other, even if she had so many relationships and maybe she was also a prostitute, because why so many money in her pocket with a low salary? But I think that somebody who loved to obsession Hazel killed her.
The story would leave a lasting impression on Mark, as grisly, mysterious murders tend to do on young children. Decades later, Mark would become a television screenwriter and would recall the story to his friend and director, David Lynch. Sometime in the late 80s, Mark Frost and David Lynch sat in a coffee shop mulling over ideas for a new television show, when suddenly they conjured up the image of a lifeless, beautiful blonde washed ashore on a small town lake. It was the notion of this girl's body being found on the edge of the water, the mystery remaining unsolved, the multiple aspects, and kind of cross-cultural and different social classes of people she interacted with. It really struck my fancy. And instead of Laura's murder taking place in Sand Lake, New York, the show was instead set in the near doppelganger equivalent of Snoqualmie, North Bend, later fictionally known as Twin Peaks. With Frost's inspiration in place, Laura was then shaped. Where Hazel was 20 years old, Laura was 17. She was a straight-A student, faithful girlfriend.
So, this was how the creation of Twin Peaks, as I told you before, Mark Frost went to Taborton at his grandmother's house, and so she knew about this murder happened in 1908. And now
David Lynch to reveal the mystery of who committed the murder, and in doing so, paved the way to its cancellation after the second season. Still, even after it ended, the show maintained a cult following that only seemed to grow more and more over time. Eventually, as Laura stated in its final episode of the second season,
I'll see you again in 25 years.
It returned in 2017 with a third season simply known as The Return. The show...
And now, a surprise for everybody, I hope. Thanks to a guy so courageous who did the whole path into the wood that Hazel and her killer could have go through until arriving to Teal's Sand Lake, where the corpse of Hazel was found. So it's very impressive. So I make you see. And now, I go to the point because the video is long, and to arrive, the way to arrive to the haunted lake. Remember, haunted lake, because the ghost of Hazel is still there. Okay.
I'm glad you were here, because if you weren't, I was going to have a conniption.
And then you will point the exact place in which the dead body was found. This is the lake.
Even now, not anywhere I used to. Used to be able to go all the way down there. At one point, I went all the way over to the other side, practically on this beach. There are a lot of people here, wandering around, animals.
So you can see that the waters, also after more than 1 century, are not clear, are muddy, like they were when Hazel was found dead.
Came down in 95 when I was here.
Here, it's the point in which
Sand Lake. Beautiful place.
In which she was found dead with face down. This is the exact place of the lake in which Hazel was found dead. And immediately as I watched this video, I felt that sensation inside of me, haunted. And so I tell you this. Look at the place. So, who killed Hazel Irene Drew? If I have the possibility to visit Teal's Sand Lake, New York, I'm sure that I will reveal you the identity of the killer. So, the identity of her killer. So, if I have the chance, I will make you know. See you soon. Stay tuned.